Our guest is now the really renowned translator Uda Strätling, who translated more than 100 books. I'm not really even sure about the number of books you did. Maybe it's 150 into German, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. You have a long, distinguished career as a translator already. Famously, not only prose, where you discovered a lot of authors which you brought, who you brought into German, but also poetry. And one of your translation projects you kind of like worked through your whole life basically was Emily Dickinson's letters and the included poems in the letters. Why this fascination with Dickinson, and why this fascination with translating her? Because I imagine this is one of the hardest things you ever did.
Definitely, because you always have a problem in poetry that you have such a density of space where there's so much happening that it's difficult to sort of cover everything in equal measure. But Dickinson is the absolute extreme, because her poems are very short, very dense, and highly, they're loaded. They're loaded with meaning. They're loaded with complicated analytical considerations. And it's just a huge challenge. I mean, and it's fun. It's also an ordeal, if you will. And it's impossible to achieve. It might be easier in other languages, but German does not easily lend itself to this kind of, we don't have as many one-syllable words. And Emily Dickinson uses tons of one-syllable words. I have the same thing in a way, with Mary Jo Bang. And I do believe there are similarities in the sense that with Mary Jo Bang's poetry, you'll also find this sort of very keen analytical mind and a penchant for very powerful, I don't know whether you metaphor, imagery, semantics, basically. They can sort of, one word can blow up in your face. I mean, and this is sort of typical Dickinson, and I do find it in Mary Jo Bang's poems as well.
So Mary Jo Bang's A Doll for Throwing is your current project, and which I'm really happy to collaborate with you. Again, we did Elegy, translated Elegy, Mary Jo Bang's seminal work on grief, I would say, which also showed this condensed electricity of words. Emily Dickinson's phrase for that is naked voltage. It's kind of like this this current through the.
That's what Ted Hughes said of her poetry. Yeah. So this current running through the work, which kind of like electrifies everything around it. And if we want to kind of like talk a little bit about Mary Jo Bang's project, kind of like, how did you perceive A Doll for Throwing? We met her here in St. Louis. She gave you this book, and it's a book. Could you maybe kind of like talk a little bit about how you read it and how you approached translating it? Yes, well, at first I had no idea what it was about, because the English title obviously doesn't trigger the same sort of associations or connotations that you would have in German, because and that will be a problem for us when sort of deciding on a title for the German version, because Wolfpuppe, the doll that Alma Buschasidov created at the Bauhaus, this sort of floppy knitted doll or crocheted, or I don't know exactly, with a wooden head that would sort of fall gracefully wherever you threw it. I didn't realize that was what was behind this title. A doll for throwing, to me at first just sounded very strange. But that makes you curious, obviously. And then if you open the book, it begins with a sort of, we'd encountered this with Max Porter. You have an empty frame. I don't know if you can see this. And it's left to your imagination what's going on in there. And then it's followed by poems, prose poems that are unusual in that they are justified text. So you have the lines running over basically the line break, but within a fixed border. So you have this sort of this paradox of fixed borders with everything else inside being in motion. And again, going from English to German, you're hard at work trying to sort of, because I felt that despite the clean edges, you still have lines, and you still have the line breaks that are meant to sort of that come with a surprise. I mean, to me, the obvious line in The Head of a Dancer is one of the very first ones. How does it go? The days when you lean your head forward, then pull your head back to see the sun is, and then you have the break basically, is only a chrysanthemum. You know, you think, what is this? So it's a very fascinating constraint that she has sort of chosen to enact. How would you say? I mean, she writes somewhere that what she liked about the doll for throwing is, for one thing, the way it falls gracefully, and one could say that of her main figure or character. The character she's interested in mostly is Lucia Moholy-Nagy, or Moholy, whom she says, despite being thrown in a lot of ways, she was Jewish. She had to flee Germany. She lost her glass negatives. She wasn't recognized for the work she'd done at the Bauhaus. That she went on to do some very productive, some very important work. That's one thing. Then Mary Jo Bang also says, interesting to her was the fact that throwing is what a ventriloquist does with his or her voice. And so the doll for throwing is an apt metaphor for these poems, for poetry in general, for the way Mary Jo sort of enacts voices. She, interestingly enough, she's added a disclaimer to the book, quoting that very famous line of Emily Dickinson's that she'd sent to Thomas Wentworth Higginson, was it? Where is it? Here we are. When I state myself as the representative of the verse, it does not mean me, but a supposed person. So in every poem, you have at least two Mary Jo Bangs. You have sort of the ventriloquist, or rather the poet making her her voice speak and the voice that she lends her first person speaker. Usually it's first person. Sometimes it sort of segues into a we or a you or a very sort of conversational you. So just any number of aspects that you have to take into account, and there's always this interest in voice and what it means not to speak for someone, because that's not what she intends or does, but to speak as sort of the ventriloquist doll, lending his or her voice to anyone in the arts who, or the, like these women, struggle to gain recognition for their work. That's basically the kind of leitmotif in the.
In our context of translation, then, throwing the voice and acting a voice, giving the voice to somebody, is, how do you see translation then? I mean, we are also giving a voice to her poems, so it's kind of like the ventriloquist of the ventriloquist in that sense.
I know. Yes. And I'm often, I'm not certain about the tone. It's obviously you have the differences in the sort of registers in German and English, and you often can't achieve the kind of ease or colloquial ease that Mary Jo has, but I think I've changed a few things again in the poem that I'd sent you as a sort of an example, and I think this is just a work in progress where you have to sort of develop and find and search and refine and the voice. The thing is, being that the frame of reference is German, you know, Bauhaus, Weimar, Dessau, and so that a lot of references or titles of artworks that inspired Mary Jo to write several of these poems either don't have any titles at all or have completely different German titles, which I haven't been able to find. But in some respects, sort of going from a German setting in English to German, again, is a type of reverse engineering or something. I'm not sure how that, it does work, but there are instances where she, for instance, she'll include German phrases in the English poems, and she does that at the very beginning only, I think once or twice, perhaps to give her readers the setting. So there's that as well. There's a sort of weird backflip.
So that is always a good question, you know, kind of like, how do you attempt as a translator to represent this this foreignization, this import of languages, this kind of like multi-layered version. So one way would always be to do it graphically, you know, to either you know, send it in italics, or to also in this sense, it makes no sense to reverse translate the German word or the German context into English, because Bauhaus is not an American English kind of like art field. It's not a frame which would work. So
I think in the two poems I'm thinking of, the one instance she has just sort of, it's almost in German, it's a type of signature you'd put under a letter, sort of best regards or something. It's mit freundlichen Grüßen.
Mhm.
And that you could probably leave because it doesn't have any, as far as I can see up to this point, it doesn't have a function that goes a lot further than that. She just wants the German.
And to go off of that, I mean, yeah, she wants a German, but even in German, and maybe this is one angle which we could explore in the translation itself. German has a lot of formality layers, much, I would say many more than colloquial English has in that sense. And mit freundlichen Grüßen is such, it's such a bureaucratic phrase, you know, so that
so that everyone will get it, I think.
Absolutely, everyone will get it, and everyone has everybody will read it as the presence of a different formality, a different voice, a different kind of like layer of
and it's
talk.
very ironic. I mean, the stanza is, I'm a double of myself, one half a doll that was spared, one half dead. A feather is a form of frou-frou, and only so interesting. We want no more of that business. We are spent, some. Mit freundlichen Grüßen. It's kind of like that's all she wrote. So, you know, and the second in the, yeah.
You know, let's come back to this poem, and I'd ask you to also send me this one, or I asked Mary Jo to send me that one as a PDF that we can also show it to the audience. It's the double of the self, you know, the doubleness of self. Mary Jo is quite often obsessed with doublings in her poems, and again, this is we talked about layers of voices, ventriloquist projection of translation, of a translation of ekphrastic poems. I mean, they are quite often also ekphrastic in the sense that they are dealing with existing artworks and not only life of artists. And here we have the double of the self, which means the double of the self becomes a triple, or in our case, even a quadruple of selves, because of the presence of translators as well. And you are one translator who always inscribes herself with a very distinct voice into your projects. So maybe you can kind of like talk a little bit about the concept of voice and self in translation.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, that's something only others can say of my work. I wouldn't be able to tell whether, you know, obviously I have a specific voice, but it's not a conscious thing. I mean, in the case of Dickinson, for instance, I just felt that you have to go at it radically. There's no point in doing this sort of melodious hymn meter, pious little metrical thing. That's not her. It is really, to my mind, about the naked voltage. And so to achieve that, I will take risks. And I believe I probably do that in most of my work, or especially wherever you're, what we like to say, dancing in chains. I think it's a sort of, it's an aphorism that goes back to Voltaire or something. You have this, and that's why I like these probably. You have the constraint, and then you try to move freely. But that can mean some wild jerkings, or, you know, you make an extra move. I don't know. It's a very, and still it's a very sort of, it's a slow process. You're testing, you're trying out, you're moving back, you're moving forward, you dare a little more, then you think, oh my God, no, that's too much. It's a very precarious sort of trying to find your way. And especially having these borders where any word you change will make the whole block shift and move, because the one word will be too long and then everything else. So yeah, and voice, I'm still not sure about these, about the tone. It seems such a reserved, sort of at one remove. I mean, we've spoken about the fact that Mary Jo obviously is in every poem, but also at one remove, taking a step back. And that does make the tone somewhat, it can be a bit cool, conversational, but you know, in this, she switches from a we to you to I. There's so much going on, and there's so many layers of meaning and backstory, and where this doubleness or triple, quadrupleness, whatever, she explicitly makes that the theme of one poem called "The Game of Roles," which is a play by Luigi Pirandello, which is in itself so convoluted, because, let me see if I can find the note. The play was first performed in 18. The characters in Pirandello's play, 6 characters in search of an author, are rehearsing this play. So it's a a play with a play in a play in a play in a play. And these 6 characters are are the real people, as opposed to the actors who are rehearsing the other play. And these real people sort of storm the stage and say, you have to do our life story. And the more they get excited about this, the more the real characters say, no, but we have to play this, because you can't. You don't know what's going on in inside of us. And so the discrepancy between experience and description, or enactment or voice, seems to be one that sort of accompanies Mary Jo Bang throughout her work. And,
so six actors in search for an author. Here in the book, an author voicing different characters, searching for the author's voice. Kind of like it's a very tricky kind of like loop, which always starts anew, starts again. And translating that is reproducing this process on a second level. I always felt as a poet and as a writer, the main difference for me between translation and writing is that I don't have to invent if I translate. I have to reinvent, and the reinvention in Mary Jo's case, and also in several of the authors we have been able to translate together, like John Ashbery, like Ray Armantrout, and also curiously Max Porter, our favorite English novelist, who kind of like is a crazy author of energy, I would say. That reinvention process digs so deep into the poetic process, into the stake which those authors are giving to their work, because they are not sure of self, they are not sure of authorship, they're not sure of voices. They are voicing the world, they are voicing the characters, they are explorers in the realms of poetry, explorers in the realms of literature. And translating them, at least for me, is part of my work as an author. I count those books as ours, you know, those are our books, because we did the same work as they did. We're not only tracing a chess party which was played with Capablanca and Aljachin in the 1930s or something like this. It is more because when you translate in the language you translated it in, if you find work like Mary Jo's, it is exploding in you. It is kind of like a creation of not a second nature, but it is kind of like a reproduction of the process, at least. And
yeah,
and that is the interesting part.
I'd agree that it's the same sort of expedition. You go on an adventure, and you're looking for the way through this sort of text, voice, sort of conglomerate. The problem is, and you're right, obviously, it's so empowering, or it's a kind of freedom not to have to invent this. But what do you do when poems are as hermetic as these? That's one question that sort of really, I'm preoccupied with this question, because in that instance, as a translator, do I not have to know more than the reader does to be able to give the underlying sort of rätsel, what's the word for rätsel? Conundrums.
The riddle, the mystery. Yeah,
riddle, yeah. That's something that I've never encountered in this measure, because interestingly, she does give us endnotes naming usually the artwork or the object, or in this case, the play that inspired her to write the text. But there's so much left out. I mean, in this Pirandello piece, she names the problem. In any narrative, facts are present or not. One might assume the more facts, the better the constructed history, since facts are meant to reflect what can't be computed by storytelling alone, which is said to be subjective and therefore inaccurate. In many cases, the story is filled with complex details which only one person knows. And the main reason, yeah, the main reason why I sort of homed in on Head of a Dancer is because it's one poem on which Mary Jo Bang has commented fairly widely. So I know more about this poem than a lot of others, and there is so much backstory. And my question, you know, what does hermetic mean? Or do I have to supply the reader with an interpretation? That would be going too far. But I have to try to find the same balance between remaining open to as many readings as possible and it not derailing completely into something that just seems absurd.
So if the author or the voice who writes a poem, an hermetic poem, like in Mary Jo's case, is witnessing something which only she can witness in the act of creation, in the act of writing. The role of the translator then is to witness this in the original and to read about it and to do a lot of research about it in order to recreate this witnessing situation of the process of the creation act itself, with all its knowledge behind the stories behind the story, so to speak, the details behind the story, but also to leave open exactly this kind of like insecurity and this openness, in order to make it a poem. The multiple layers. And that kind of like leads me to maybe our conclusive question. Thank you so much for this talk. It was very enlightening in many ways. The English Romantic poet Percy Shelley once remarked that poets are the unsung or unacknowledged legislators of the world. What are translators then?
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to have the context to that to be able to actually, the legislators of the world.
Sounds scary, right? Sounds bureaucratic.
No, I think I sort of can guess at what he might have meant. Well, then translators would be those who make that possible on a universal level. I mean, legislators of the world, literature is extremely helpful and how do you say, efficient in helping us understand the world, helping us experience world, helping us go beyond what seems familiar to us and comfortable to us. So we're opening up. Who was it that said, I think it was Max Porter, who said, out of translation will travel. You know, it's the only way, because not all of us speak so many languages that we could read the sort of most important work in the original. So if poets are the legislators of the world, though I'm still not sure of the meaning of that, then I don't know. Translators would be their amanuenses.
Translators may be
secretaries or whatever.
I think they are the NGOs. Trying to kind of like enrich the world on a not too intrusive level of this idea of universalism, which you just like created as an idea. And since literature is so based in language, without the translators, texts cannot travel, poetry cannot travel, and human experience can't travel. And so the travel, maybe translators are part of a travel agency, a universal travel agency. I like that idea a lot. And to kind of like round it off with a quote from Wittgenstein, who famously started his Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus with "Die Grenzen meiner Sprache sind die Grenzen meiner Welt." The borders of my language are the borders of my world. This kind of like ties in, I think, quite heavily into poetry and into translation, because translation then means that we are crossing borders and that we try to help to smuggle experiences and great work from one country into the other, in order to kind of like erase the notion maybe even of frames, borders, countries. And that is a very, very beautiful thing to say about translation, because that makes us the universal hosts of poetical experience.